HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Environment, A History of the Idea by Paul Ward, Libby Robin, and Sverker Sorlin. Read by Henrietta Meire. Prologue. The environment is all around us. This book asks the question, where did it come from? The environment is under threat as never before. Is it possible, we ask, for the economy to grow without the environment being destroyed? Will our lifestyles end up impoverishing the planet for our children and grandchildren? Yet if we look back, within the lifetimes of many people alive today, such questions would have made no sense. This was not because we were having no impact on nature, nor because we were unaware of the fact of that impact. What we lacked was an idea, a way of imagining the web of interconnection and consequence of which the natural world is made. Without this, we also lacked a way to describe the scale and scope of human impact upon that world. This idea, a planet-changing idea because it made the planet visible in a wholly new way, was the environment. This is a book about how the idea of the environment came to be, and its consequences. We begin this story in 1948, in the ferment of reconstruction and recrimination, in the hope of new global institutions, and the fear of humans' capacity for almost limitless destruction. It was at this moment that a new idea and a new narrative about the planet-wide impact of people's behavior emerged. The environment provided a concept that linked changes close to home to worldwide pressures. At a time of a new world-mindedness, the environment became one of the concerns that nations shared. It was important for the raw resources that could create new, peaceful societies. The conservation, restoration, and enhancement of the environment were part of international post-war reconstruction, and the environment shaped how many of the new global institutions developed. In creating an object of imagination and measurement, it allowed a new kind of question about nature and human responsibilities to be asked. Is the world sick? Is the environment getting worse or better? But the environment changes over time, and so do the ideas about what it is. This depends on who speaks for the environment. Which people are concerned about it? How do people think about it? The 7 decades that have followed have seen vastly changed ideas about the environment. It has become much more complex. The environment is not just about the land, but also the sea and the sky. The great oceans of the world and the Earth's atmosphere are important to life, but they are not the jurisdiction of single nations. The global environment provides habitats for plants and animals, including humans. The rise of megacities has changed the way humans live in the world. In the 1940s, most people lived close to where their food was grown, but now a majority live in cities, often very big cities in rapidly developing places like China and India. The environment has gone from being the background to the human world to being an idea shaped by planetary consciousness. The Earth itself has become a person, an agent of history. People talk differently about the environment because of this. In 1948, the environment emerged in a human historical context, and its institutions were about management and regulation. In 2018, we have so much more information and data from science, and it is freely available in colourful formats throughout the Internet. One picture from 1968 stands out as a changemaker. The view of the Earth from space, the blue planet, whole and exceptional in the solar system in being suitable for life. Earth is sometimes called the Goldilocks planet. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Its exceptionalism calls for a new sort of care on a planetary scale. That people can see the whole planet in a single image has moved the concept of the environment from international to global, and now planetary. The context for life itself has become both bigger and smaller. There is only one Earth. What prompts change in environmental concerns at different times? Sometimes it is a historical moment, a disaster. For example, the accident on April 26, 1986, at Chernobyl nuclear power station in Ukraine heightened concern about how nuclear particles travel on the wind, how they go into the soil and affect food, what they mean for the future health of children growing up, and how the plants and animals that remain have responded to the traces of nuclear explosions in the environment. Each of these questions engaged different experts, people who measured the directions of the prevailing wind, how the nuclear particles were carried in the atmosphere, and how long it took for them to be absorbed. Agricultural and soil experts measured what might be safe to eat, and health scientists tried to improve the quality of future life for people exposed to the catastrophe. In the decades since, ecologists have measured how wild nature has responded and evolved in an area where people have been excluded. A new nature has grown up in this place of catastrophe. It will have a different future because of this moment. For many people, ecologists have been the key experts of the environment. Indeed, in some places, people call the environment the ecology. As we trace the environment from 1948 onward in history and into the future, we find different experts are important at different times. Catastrophes have sometimes created the moment for a new expertise, but they are not always emergencies or instant disasters like Chernobyl. More often, it is slow catastrophes that change the environment, working over longer time periods. Droughts and famines, the acidification of the oceans from agricultural chemicals, lead poisoning in children playing in areas with lead paint, are all disasters, but they evolve more slowly than the human eye can see. Sometimes we know about the catastrophe only because of technical experts and specialist technologies. The thinning of the ozone layer in the atmosphere, caused by refrigerants called chlorofluorocarbons, is a good example of how expertise can help manage the environment. The ozone layer is healing because atmospheric chemists identified what was causing the hole, and industry quickly changed the way refrigerators worked, using a different chemical that did not naturally combine with ozone. Generally, however, slow catastrophes are much harder to manage than crises and emergencies. There is more negotiation with more parties over longer times, and we often need many different types of expertise. In this book, we have started with the post-war moment, when the world needed more food and building materials. Natural resource managers were important, and so were the new international negotiations that included concerns about the environment. Experts gathered around resources, conservation, and climate. The overall story reveals that the environment demanded interdisciplinary and multifaceted knowledge-making and understanding on many scales, as does managing and planning for the future. Yet each area of knowledge that fed into the new idea of the environment had its own history and set of techniques that in turn shaped the new understanding. We introduce them through important moments when they made a distinct contribution to the idea of environment, and we trace the history and controversies that put them in a position to make that contribution. More and more, the story we present is about the rise of integrated expertise of Earth system science, which treats the Earth as a dynamic system always in flux, and of big science, which joins up many different experts, and of the tools of modeling and measurement enhanced by the digital revolution, which accelerates across the same time span. The environment is about people too, and how they respond to its changes and challenges, and it is not just experts who care about its future. questions of justice for humans and for the environment itself are moral and complex. So this is not so much a book about what the environment is as much as it is about what humans have wanted to make of it. It is about the imagination, the history and the creativity of the experts, as well as their technical and diplomatic skills, and how well ordinary people have understood these and contributed to framing environmental concerns. Expertise has moved popular opinion, business practices, and understandings of the world, but only so far. Expertise has limits in the political world. We all share the environment and have a say in what is possible. Thus, the environment is a key concept. It drives conversations about what it means to be human in the world on many scales. These conversations include what sorts of responsibilities humans take for the results of their actions in the past, present, and future. 1. Road to Survival. A Fable for Tomorrow. Ask many people old enough to remember the first album of the Beatles and news of the blast-off of Yuri Gagarin, what sparked their interest in the environment, and they will answer Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring. There once was a town in the heart of America. It began. America was perhaps at the peak of its economic might, and, for much of the population, its home comforts. A vision of a fabled land, as sweet and harmonious as when first laid out by the doughty pioneers, leapt into the minds of millions as they began to read, perhaps already relaxing into a wistful reverie. But within a page, things began to change in the heartland. People felt sick. Doctors were mystified. Children out playing collapsed and died. And where were the birds? The skies were empty. The skies were silent. Was it witchcraft? Was it some monstrous enemy? It was not. The creeping death was a product of science. It had been brought about by products designed to keep people healthy and the soil productive. They were made by the chemical industry, but it was ordinary Americans who picked up the products at the store and polluted their land, their wildlife, and their bodies. The people had done it themselves. First serialized in The New Yorker in June 1962, Silent Spring saw a vicious reaction from the chemical industry, which in the end only consolidated Carson's fame, with invitations for TV appearances to the White House and to testify before government committees that would affirm her claims. Her work galvanized activism and public policy in many countries. Carson herself would die within 2 years, at the young age of 56. But her legacy embraced and spanned the planet. Today, when the director of the United States Environmental Protection Agency steps forward to make any major pronouncement, he or she does so in the Rachel Carson Green Room. Silent Spring famously described the contamination of man's total environment with substances of incredible potential for harm. In the environment, a word she still felt the need to qualify, Carson found a term that would encompass the astonishing pervasiveness of chemical pollution that she catalogued. She was trained in ecology, a science teaching us that we have to understand the interaction of all living things in the environment in which we live. This was her third book. She published 2 popular works on marine science in the post-war years, and before that worked as a research scientist. Yet before alighting upon that so memorable title, Silent Spring, she had considered using The Control of Nature, or Man Against the Earth. Carson considered the specific issues of pesticides to have a much wider resonance, which was emblematic of humanity's more general relationship with nature. At the same time, it seems as if in the years around 1960, she was still searching for a term that could highlight this relationship for a broader audience. The environment perhaps did not yet seem popular enough for a book title. In fact, neither of her early suggested titles, using control or against, were very good descriptions of what she wrote about, as humans were clearly not controlling nature in the way they might desire, while the risks she described were as much to people as to the earth. The environment would come to signify dangers within us in the forms of toxins, as much as outside, what we were doing to the planet, and might rebound upon us. Such was Carson's impact that, for many, her work later seemed almost a foundational moment for the term. This book is a history of that idea of the environment. This was not a new word or a new idea in 1962 by any means. But Carson's treatment of the idea does exemplify an enormous shift that had taken place in the years before she wrote. For many decades, environment had been a word used to describe the context or background to the real subject of the story, whatever that might be. A study of a species, a writer, a society, a race. It was shorthand for the set of unique surrounding circumstances, which might prove to be overpowering, serendipitous, exculpating, or promoting of adaptation or balance. Of course, this is still a meaning we understand in the English language today. Things can be explained by their environment, but that environment is not the real subject of interest. It is not really a thing at all. Carson, in contrast, wrote about the environment, a thing with its own essence that itself became vulnerable, a victim of circumstances. As Carson put it, a fragile web of life, subject to contamination and assault, its integrity subject to disturbance, to becoming corrupt and being engulfed. There had been a shift from a world where man was moulded by the environment to him being able to alter the nature of his world. Yet this transformation in meaning, and a whole environmental revolution, was not a product of the 60s. It was not a revelation bursting from a generation discovering protest, space travel, and sexual intercourse for the first time, to rehearse some other myths. Nor did the idea of the environment under threat detonate unexpectedly in the assured affluence and confidence of a land halfway, as we now know, through the term of its charismatic and zestful young president, John F. Kennedy. The environment was an idea whose moment came earlier, whose story was first written in an earlier time. In keeping with the foreboding and uncertainty associated with it, we must return to a world trying to put itself back together after a shattering war. 1948. January 1, 1948. A Thursday. Was mild, wet and windy in London, a frosty and sunny day in Berlin, and a rainy day with thunderstorms in Washington. In Moscow it was full winter with a stiff 10 degrees below zero. 6 months later, Berlin would be the hot centre of a Cold War between these cities as a blockade and airlift, perhaps the most famous event of that year, began. The 1st of January was also the day when Britain nationalised its railways, when the first colour newsreel was filmed in Pasadena, California, and when the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, became effective, signalling the ambition to build a world of free trade and openness, at least among the 23 signatory nations. An old order was dissolving. Sri Lanka and Malaysia expected their independence within weeks. Before the month was out, in the chaos and bloodshed of post-partition India, Mahatma Gandhi would be assassinated. This was a world in the shadow of past and future wars. In vanquished Germany, starvation was common, looting and despair was still everywhere. The bitter and prolonged winter of 1947 had created fuel and food scarcities across the European continent. For some, the war had not just shown humans at their worst, it had shown them as they really are. In October, the Soviet Union presented a proposal to the United Nations to ban nuclear weapons. The proposal was rejected, and in late August the following year, the Soviet Union detonated its own atomic bomb. Yet the natural world still offered some respite. George Orwell, amid the bomb sites and ration cards of post-war London, wrote how the atom bombs are piling up in the factories, the police are prowling through the cities, the lies are streaming from loudspeakers. But the earth is still going around the sun, and neither the dictators nor the bureaucrats, deeply as they disapprove of the process, are able to prevent it. In 1948, he retreated to the solace of a cottage on the Scottish island of Jura, writing a book with the year's numbers in reverse in the title, 1984. Yet all was not well with nature. Shadows of another kind loomed ahead. They were modestly signposted in a book that appeared first in April in the United States and in June in England, Road to Survival by William Vogt. This road was not the path of escape from the aggressions of the Axis powers or the pressures of metropolitan life. It was a different, daunting trail, a way to be chosen or not by everyone on the planet, because everyone would have to walk it. By excessive breeding and abuse of the land, mankind has backed itself into an ecological trap, Vogt thundered. The present state of the world portended an existential threat, a trajectory much more all-encompassing than that offered by atomic weapons, as yet owned only by the United States. To write about the changes occurring to nature in 1948 was already to produce a history of our future, as the final chapter of Vogt's book was named, an experience totally new to humanity. Road to Survival presented a new history of the planet precisely because it was about the planet as a whole and all the varied peoples that lived on it. It was a story of global interconnections, unmistakable since the war and its aftermath, but a story of ecological rather than political and military destruction. An eroding hillside in Mexico or Yugoslavia, Vogt wrote, affects the living standard and probability of survival of the American people. We form an Earth Company, and the lot of the Indiana farmer can no longer be isolated from that of the Bantu. This was a new narrative about our planet, not of dreams of wealth or ideological rifts, but about the very earth that ailed beneath our feet. As Vogt declared in the preface to the English edition, the world is sick. Vogt presented the curve of the world's population, already rising steeply for some 50 years, and contrasted it with a graph of natural resources. These included topsoil, forests, water, grasslands, and the biophysical web that holds them together. This curve of resources had been decreasing since industrialization, but now it is plunging downward like a rapid. For Vogt, these two curves encapsulated the essence of his message and the fate of the world. They had crossed and were now drawing apart. If that gap could not be closed, we may as well give up all hope of continuing civilized life. Like Gadarene swine, we shall rush down a war-torn slope to a barbarian existence in the blackened rubble. Vogt did not come from nowhere. Trained in ecology at St. Stephen's, now Bard College on the Hudson River in New York State, he was a dedicated ornithologist and a lifelong nature protectionist. He brought a scientific background to his cause, but also the practical skills of a negotiator. Yet, like the later Silent Spring, Road to Survival was no scientific textbook. It was a book of passion and of outcry. It was written to move readers, not merely tell them things. The world of Road to Survival was one suffering the disease of overpopulation. Its symptoms were degraded soils, resource depletion, food scarcity, starvation, famine, and disease, all of which had accelerated during the recently ended war. The world in 1948 was being overwhelmed by modernity, by a humanity that had failed to set limits to what the human enterprise could achieve. Vogt, as much as any American on the threshold of the Cold War, was strongly anti-Soviet, but he was also deeply distrustful of capitalism. Road to Survival quickly became an international bestseller, translated into 9 languages and popularized by Reader's Digest. The book reached an estimated 30 million readers. Vogt became a well-known voice for population control, was appointed National Director of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America from 1951 to 1962, and served as a scientific representative to the United Nations. The book was his rallying cry. Vogt's writing was also novel in his use of the term the environment. In this thinking, environment ceased to mean context, just the local surroundings of an individual organism. Rather, in his mind, the environment became a global object. Indeed, it would come to embody the global in our minds, especially after that image of our planet, a shimmering blue-green orb in the darkness, became fixed by pictures taken from the Apollo missions. This global object had a fundamental unity and a single destiny. Would that spell doom or survival? Vogt wrote, "We live in one world, in an ecological and environmental sense." In this there was also a tacit priority. Environmental concerns were the top value, the preeminent issue. Population growth was not so much a problem for the populations themselves, or for the nations and their well-being, but it had become a problem for the planet. High birth rates were not an issue for the health of mothers, fathers, or children, but rather for the wealth and health of bogs, jungles, forests, and rivers. The Accidental Revolution of the Environment. Road to Survival appeared at the beginning of a revolution in thinking. Part of the change was to make the insights of an ecologist political. Vogt's work privileged the expertise of the ecologist, combining his scientific training with views formed by wide travels and rich experience from fieldwork. He had spent several years in Latin America as chief of the conservation section of the Pan-American Union, surveying population and resources. He cited examples from El Salvador, Costa Rica, Mexico, Venezuela, and Peru. Part of the power of his argument was to discover the trajectory for a whole planet everywhere, in places that people knew or could imagine. He connected, as we would later say, the local and the global. This was a notion that became embedded in the idea of the environment as he used it. There was an environment outside your door, and it was the same environment as the one outside any door on Earth. And what happened to each place had ramifications for all the others. The idea itself scaled up and down. It was inside and out, local and global. This was to become one of the key properties of environmental research in the second half of the 20th century. It worked on many scales. The environment could appear on any level, from the life world of the microscopic organism to the entire world of humans, the Earth, and its atmosphere. Vogt had corresponded with Aldo Leopold, another ecologist and the doyen of American conservation by the 1940s. Road to Survival was emblematic of a crucial generational change in thinking about conservation as a predominantly localized issue, to one where a planetary environment gathered together all the strings of all the environments that existed, and in turn made each of those, every mountain, wetland, forest, pond, bay, city, a subset of that whole. This thinking was prefigured in the concerns of Leopold, who had wondered if the war had been caused by the same ecological forces that led to localized extinctions of animals. Leopold died fighting a wildfire in the very month Road to Survival appeared, and his classic Sand County Almanac was published posthumously the following year. He wrote of a land ethic, of the need to extend obligation and responsibility beyond the human realm to the environment. Conservation was an ethical issue, perhaps the ethical issue. Leopold declared, "There is as yet no ethnic dealing with man's relation to land and to the animals and plants which grow upon it. Land is still property. The land relation is still strictly economic, entailing privileges but not obligations." Vogt also echoed his fellow American ecologist Paul B. Sears, whose focus was soil degradation and desertification in the light of the Midwestern Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Ecology was the type of expertise that the world needed, Although, Vogt added, it must be assisted by the social sciences, the radar that can avert.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?